Welcome everyone. Today's topic is going to be group or grouping, and I think it is the beginning of the real power of MicroStrategy desktop. Grouping allows you to reorganize data in a way that it does not exist in when you bring it into MicroStrategy desktop, whether it's a connection to a database or it's in memory. It allows you to do things like create hierarchies. It allows you to reorganize data, create categories that did not otherwise exist. It allows you to create custom sorting. And lastly, it allows you to create calculations on attributes. So we have a lot to cover, so we'll get right into it. In this particular data set, what we're looking at is regional sales by person. So notice that each person is assigned, it's a one-to-one relationship between the region and the person. In the West we have Andrea, and in the East we have Chuck. And what I want to do is I want to give Andrea and Chuck some help by adding an additional sales rep to each of their regions. Since this data doesn't exist, I'm going to have to do it as a custom group or as a group. To do that, first thing I want to do is I want to reorganize my data slightly, and I want to sort the data in first by person, which we're already doing, and then by sales and in descending order. Now this gives me the ability to look at the states in the regions. And if you notice, California and Washington constitute the majority of the contribution for the Western region. So I want to keep that with Andrea, and so therefore I would create a group for Andrea just with California and Washington. So the way to do that is I'm going to left click my mouse and hold my control button and then left click on Washington State. So that's a typical multi-select. And I'm going to right click on either one of these elements and go group. And then in here what I'm going to do is type in Andrea's name and click save. Now what has happened is that California and Washington State are now joined together and they're reporting as one entity. And we'll get into how this works in a few minutes, and you'll see this may not make sense at first, but it will make sense in a moment. So the next group is going to be the remainder of the states in the Western region. And to highlight those, I'm going to click on the first one, Arizona, and the last one, Wyoming, while I hold the Shift key. Notice this is, again, a traditional multi-select, a Windows multi-select function using the Shift and the clicking. So I'm going to right-click in any one of the elements and go group. And this group is actually going to be assigned to Jorge Cruz. Now the South, we're not going to change any of the organization from the South, nor will we change any of the organization of the Central, but we still have to add them to their own group. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and do East first. So I'm going to choose New York, Pennsylvania, and Ohio, and I'm going to keep that with Chuck McGee. And the remainder of the states in the East, I'm going to assign to a new sales rep, Gita Johnny. And for the last set of groupings, I need to put all of the states within the South and then all of the states within the Central into two separate groups. So now we have our reorganization of sales reps to states. We've kind of lost some level of detail, but don't worry, we really haven't. So the first thing I want to do is I want to rename this group, because if you notice, when we created the group, this title changed from state group to from state to state group. But we didn't lose state. In fact, if you come over here, state still exists in the data set, but state group was added. And really, to better identify this, I'm going to give it a different name. So I'm going to right-click on the state group and go rename. And I'm going to call this salesperson. So salesperson, and notice that the header for that column has now changed. A little bit of a side note, if I had changed the name here, which I could do, I could right click on the header and go rename it here. That renaming does not affect what happens in the data sets. That only is a rename on this particular report. So I wanted to rename it universally, so I changed it in the data set. So now I'm going to go ahead and remove person from this report. Now I've got the regions and the salespeople, and I'm going to add state back in. So to see this better, we're going to go ahead and reorganize it. So advanced sort, and we're going to go by region and click on OK. So now, as you can see, the West is broken out by Anna and Jorge, and then the East is broken out by Chuck and Gita. So this really is more of an accurate depiction of what I want to do with my territories moving forward. Now, one of the things you can do once this has been set up, you can come up to the header and either right click or the down arrow with a left click, and you can go edit groups. When you come into here, you'll notice that each of the groups, each of the people, because these are actually group names, even though we call them the individuals, they're actually the group name. Each of the groups, actually, you can see what members exist in that group. And if I click on Jorge, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to remove Arizona from Jorge's group and click on the check mark and save. Now notice in the West, Arizona still exists now in the West, but it's not assigned to any one of the groups, whether Andrea or Anna's or Jorge's. So I'm now going to reassign Arizona to Anna's group. So I'm going to right click on Arizona and go add to group and click it and add it to Anna. So now Arizona now exists in Anna's group. So that really is kind of a neat way of reorganizing your information. I'm going to go ahead and go back and put Arizona back into Jorge's group, and I'm going to use the undo button to do that. So if I click that twice, once, twice, Arizona is now back in Jorge's group. One of the other cool things that you can do is, again, if you come back up to the header, and you can either right click or the down arrow, I'll go ahead and right click and edit groups. Notice that, as we've talked about, each of the groups has all the constituents in their definition. But what happens if something should show up, so an additional state? We're only showing states where we've done business. What happens if we start doing business in 3 or 4 other states? We have 2 options. Number one, if you remember when we did this earlier, Arizona, when we pulled Arizona out of Jorge's group and showed it by itself, it showed up by itself. And that's because this display all other elements as individual items. The other option that we could do is anything that is not defined in this group, we could define it in a group called all other. So that's just an option that you have if you don't want to see each of the individual things by themselves. You want to create a group called all other. The next thing I want to do is I want to use grouping as a sort mechanism. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and clear off salesperson, and I'm going to go ahead and clear off state. And I just left click and drug those off. I do want to highlight that salesperson is part of the data set now, and you can use that on any report for this data set. So it's not just this report. Any report, subsequent report you build, you can use this salesperson reorganization. So if you'll notice that in this particular case, I'm organized by west, south, east, and central. But as a sales director, I really want to see my east and west as the first 2 things at the top of the list. And then south and central I want to see at the bottom. Now I could do that one way by sorting descending, and that would in fact put my 2 bigger sales regions at the top. But unfortunately, this is a dynamic sorting. So as the sales number changes, so might the sort order. So I want to lock in the sort order, and I can't do that by sorting, or I can do it by sorting in the region, but it certainly doesn't put the organization the way I'd like to see it, where my east and west are at the top. So how do we do that? So the first thing we want to do is to create a group of 1. So I'm going to right click on east and go group and call this east. Notice that it moved east to the top. The next thing I'm going to do is create another group of 1 called west. That moved it under east. And I'll do the same thing for central. And south. Notice now that the regions are grouped in the way I would like them to be grouped. And additionally, as soon as I started making the group, the header changed. Regions still exist over in my dataset panel, but a new attribute was added called data group. And I'm actually going to change the name of this, and I'm going to change it here just to show you that what happens. And I'm going to call this sort. So I'm changing it in the header, but notice that it did not change over here. So I'll have to change it over here as well. One of the very cool things you can do is if you right click on the header and you go to edit groups, I now can see the groups and how they're organized. If I want to change the order of them, say I want to see south before central, I just left click and hold my mouse button and drag south above central, and now it goes east, west, south, and central. So if I click on save, it does change it in my report. So that's it for custom sorting. Then the last section is going to be on calculation. So to do the calculation, I'm going to go ahead and pull off the region sort. And I'm going to pull region back onto the report. I'm actually just going to pull it into the drop zone this time. So I've got west, south, east, and central. But I want to see what the difference is between the west and the south and the east. So in order to do that, I can just go ahead and left click on west, hold the control button, come down to east, and left click on that. So now both the west and the east are highlighted. If I right click on my mouse on either one of those attribute elements, west or east, I'll get the menu pops up and I can go to calculation. And I can do simple calculations. I can add, which would be the same as joining them together into a group. I could get the average of the two, I get the least or the greatest. But I want the delta, the difference between west and east. So I'm going to do west minus east and click on that. And I'm going to call it delta west to east. One of the first things to notice is that if you remember in the custom groups that we created previously, when we created a group, the entity, the element, was no longer in the report. But in this case, it is. So in this case, east and west still exist in the report. And the calculation is here at the top. So the difference between east and west is $46,677. So one of the things you cannot do with this is, so if I come up to regions and I right click and go to edit to groups, I actually cannot edit that calculation from here, like I could edit the groups from the typical custom groups. But I can, if I come into that attribute element and I go to calculation, I can still choose one of the calculation types that are laid out for me.